They thought I wouldn't feel the shove. At 78, people assume your senses dull like old knives, but I felt every finger on the back of that wheelchair, every tremor in the wooden boards as they rolled me toward the lake. "Just a little closer," one of them whispered. And then, one hard push, the splash, and the sickening sound of their footsteps retreating as if I were already dead. Cold swallowed me. Water climbed over my shoulders, my face, my hair. I did not scream. I let myself sink a moment, long enough to hear their voices above me, muffled, greedy, unafraid. "She drowned. Now we get the 11 million. Those were the first words I heard after they tried to kill me. Not my name, not fear, not even guilt. Just money. People always think the elderly forget how to fight for breath, how to claw toward life. But I grew up on the Atlantic shore, and even now, when my legs fail me and a cane waits by my bed every morning, my body remembers water. I pushed off the weight of the dress, angled myself sideways, and swam. Slow, heavy, but steady, toward the shadow of the pier. When my fingers touched the barnacled post, I almost laughed. After everything they'd done over the years, after every quiet humiliation, every patronizing sigh, every time they spoke over me as if I were a piece of old furniture, this was the moment they chose to underestimate me. And it was the last mistake they would ever make. I surfaced behind the wooden skirting of the dock, hidden from sight. I heard them talking somewhere above, voices low, urgent. My son-in-law's tense murmur, my nephew's shaky breath, my own daughter silent. Of course she was silent. Silence had become her specialty, her shield, her cowardice. "She sank fast," one of the men said. "Camera won't see anything. It's done." Camera. My hand froze against the slick wood. They hadn't bothered to look behind themselves. Not once. They never looked at the things that didn't serve them. The security light blinked faintly near the boathouse, and I remembered. The marina had installed new surveillance last spring, a wide angle. Motion activated, recording constantly on weekends. They didn't know that. But I did. By the time they walked away, convinced they'd solved all their financial troubles in one afternoon, I had already mapped out my path to the shore. The water numbed my arms, my legs, even my jaw, but I kept moving, inch by painful inch, until I felt mud under my palms, until I could drag my body forward. The world above looked almost peaceful, evening light, dragonflies skimming the surface, the laughter of teenagers across the lake, ordinary life going on as if my death had been a small, forgettable thing. I sat there for a moment, soaked, hair plastered to my skull, dress ruined, heart steady, not frightened, not broken. Something inside me had cracked wide open, yes, but it wasn't fear. It was clarity. For years I had known they were circling me like hungry fish, waiting for weakness. For years I had told myself to forgive, to stay quiet, to love them past their flaws. And for years they used my kindness as a convenient little staircase to climb over me. But today they showed me the truth with their own hands, and I would not unsee it again. I got up, slowly, painfully, and began the long walk home, water dripping from me like the last remnants of my old life. They thought I had drowned. They thought the lake had taken me for good. But I was still here. And for the first time in decades, I was no longer afraid of what came next. By the time I reached my front porch, the sun had already slipped behind the pines, leaving only that pale, tired light that leaks into the world before night settles. My dress clung to me like wet skin. My hair dripped down my back. My shoes squelched with every step. I must have looked like some ghost that crawled out of the lake instead of into it. But I walked. slow, stiff, leaning on the railing for balance. My legs shook from the cold and from the effort, but they carried me farther than my family ever expected they would again. When I pushed open the front door, the house greeted me with its usual quiet. No perfume of dinner in the air, no hum of conversation. Just the worn smell of home, old wood, paper, tea leaves. Nothing had been disturbed. They hadn't rushed here afterward to check, to pretend concern. Of course they hadn't. I closed the door behind me, and only then did I notice the trembling in my hands. Not fear, just the shock settling in. I sat down on the little bench by the entryway and peeled off my soaked cardigan. Water pooled on the floorboards. I could hear my own breathing, ragged but steady. The clock in the hallway ticked its slow, indifferent rhythm, the same as every night. It should have been a comfort. Instead, it felt like a reminder. This house had stood by me better than the people I raised. I took a moment before moving again. My legs felt like cold sand. I rubbed them to bring back some warmth, then pushed myself up and walked to the kitchen. Habit guided me more than thought. I put on the kettle, even though I was shaking too hard to hold a cup properly. Old women aren't supposed to climb out of lakes after their own blood tries to drown them, but old habits stay with you. While the water heated, I glanced at the window. A car rolled past the house, slow, familiar shape, familiar headlights. My daughter's husband, Grant. He didn't stop. He didn't even slow down, probably checking to make sure no police cruisers were parked outside. It was strange. I'd always thought the worst thing he'd ever done to me was take advantage of my generosity. I hadn't realized until today that advantage has a bottom to it. Once they reach the bottom, they give you the final push. The kettle clicked off. I made tea but didn't drink it. I just cupped the mug in my hands, letting the warmth bleed into my fingers. I should have called someone, the police, a neighbor, my doctor, anyone. But my mind kept circling the same quiet truth. They believed I was dead. And that gave me time. Time to think. Time to act. Time to slip through the cracks of their assumptions like water through a rotten board. I changed into dry clothes, folded the wet ones, and set them in the laundry basket. Not because they mattered, but because I needed to do something small and normal. Something that didn't involve the taste of lake water and betrayal. Then I sat in the living room. My husband's photograph stood on the mantel, the same place it had been for 20 years. He was smiling, sunburned, squinting into the camera the day we bought this house. It had felt too big for us then. Now it felt too empty. "You'd know what to do," I whispered to him. My voice cracked a little. It wasn't grief, just exhaustion. He'd always been the one with clear judgment. Me. I'd forgiven too easily, trusted too long, swallowed too much for the sake of peace. Peace that, as it turned out, only benefited the people willing to hurt me. My thoughts drifted back to the lake. The feel of the water, the tilt of the dock, their voices. The way my daughter didn't say a single word. What keeps a woman silent while her own mother is being murdered? Fear? Weakness? Dependence? None of those excuses mattered anymore. I leaned back, feeling the ache in my bones. The house creaked as if settling deeper into itself. Outside, a stray dog barked once, then fell quiet. I knew they would come eventually, not to check if I was alive, but to start planning how to explain my accident. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe the next day. They'd wait just long enough to make it believable. Let them wait. The camera at the dock had everything. and I needed to be careful with everything that happened next. One wrong move and they'd twist my survival into confusion, into age, into poor memory, into anything that freed them. I closed my eyes, letting the silence fold around me like a blanket. Not a comforting one, but one I could use to gather strength. Tonight wasn't for decisions. Tonight was for breathing, for letting my body recover, for accepting what had already begun long before the lake. They thought the water would finish me, but tomorrow I would begin something of my own. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my side, staring at the faint crack in the ceiling, the one my husband used to promise he'd fix next weekend. He never fixed it, and after he died, I never asked anyone else. Some things you leave untouched because they remind you of who you were with the person you lost. The house felt too quiet, even for me. Usually, silence comforts me. It has weight, warmth, a shape. But that night, it felt like something pressing against my ribs. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the water swallowing me, heard their voices, that cold certainty in them. She drowned, as if they'd simply tossed out a broken tool. Around 4 a.m, when the dark outside turned that strange blue that isn't night anymore, but not morning either, I pushed myself upright. My joints protested. My breath felt thin. But I knew lying in bed would only let the fear settle deeper into me. And I was too old to let fear take root again. I turned on the lamp beside the bed. Its warm light spilled across the room, catching the dust on the dresser, the old quilt at my feet, the framed photos lined neatly along the wall. My daughter at 12, gap-toothed and grinning. My husband in his uniform, holding a fishing rod. My nephew at 9, leaning against me like he belonged there. They all looked so young on those shelves. Innocent. Before life hardened them. Before money twisted everything. I stood up slowly, steadier than I expected, and walked to the bathroom. The mirror showed an older woman than the one I felt inside. Hair gray and thin at the temples, eyes tired, skin creased with the years of living and forgiving. But there was something else there, too. Something I hadn't seen in a long time. A tightness around my mouth. A steadiness in my gaze. Resolve. I washed my face and cupped water in my palms, letting it drip down my neck, washing off the remnants of lake water and the grime of their betrayal. Then I wrapped myself in my old robe and padded into the kitchen. The kettle felt heavier than usual, or maybe it was my hands. I filled it, set it on the stove, and leaned on the counter while it warmed. The slow hiss of heating metal filled the room. Little sounds matter when you're alone. They keep you anchored. I took out my old address book, the one with frayed edges and phone numbers written in my careful handwriting. My husband's handwriting still lingered on a few pages, too. He always pressed too hard with the pen, as though the ink would vanish if he didn't carve it into the paper. I ran my fingers over his letters. Beside his name was the number of the lawyer he trusted most, written almost 20 years ago. Daniel Reeves. I hadn't spoken to him in a decade. He retired, I'd heard. Still, the number was there. And in my experience, men like him never fully retire. But it wasn't time to call. Not yet. Not while they still believed I was dead. I needed them to stay comfortable in that lie a little longer. People reveal the most when they aren't afraid of consequences. The kettle clicked off. I poured myself tea and sat at the table. The steam fogged my glasses. For a while, I just held the mug, letting the heat soak into my fingers. My hands had always been my strongest part. They raised a child, tended to a husband, sorted thousands of library books, wrote letters that shaped small lives. Now, they trembled just a little. Age does that, but they still worked. I spread out the mail on the table, bills I didn't recognize, statements with strange charges, insurance letters addressed to me about my own declining cognitive function, letters I never saw before. Grant must have been intercepting them, or forging them. That man had always been too smooth, too confident, too ready to say the right thing and then act the wrong one. My daughter, Wendy, used to swear he was good for her. "Mom, he's ambitious," she'd say. "He pushes me." I remember telling her, years ago, that there's a difference between a man who lifts you and a man who stands on your shoulders. She laughed then, told me I worried too much. I wonder what she'll say now, if she'll say anything at all. I sipped my tea. The taste steadied me. Earthy, familiar. When the clock struck 6, I pulled on a sweater and stepped outside. The air was cold, sharp, and clean. Morning birds were calling from the trees, oblivious to what happened the night before. I walked down the driveway slowly, testing the strength of my legs. They held. Barely, but they held. At the end of the driveway, I stopped and looked up the street. No car, no movement. Just a neighborhood waking up, unaware that a woman who was supposed to be dead was standing in her slippers on her front lawn. I took a long breath. It burned a little in my chest, but it felt good. Real. Today, I told myself, wasn't the day for confrontation. Today was the day I began quietly pulling back everything they had taken. All the years, all the money, all the dignity. I turned back toward the house and went inside, closing the door gently. My hands were steady now. The water hadn't drowned me. It had washed me clean. By mid-morning, I felt steady enough to drive. Not comfortable, steady. At 78, you don't confuse those two things. Comfort is a warm blanket. Steadiness is the knowledge that your hands won't slip on the wheel when everything around you is falling apart. I dressed carefully. Plain trousers, a thick sweater, the brown coat my husband bought me on our last anniversary together. It still smelled faintly of cedar. I brushed my hair, pinned it back, and looked at myself one last time in the hallway mirror. A woman who had crawled out of a lake looked back, but she stood straight. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. Whatever softness I used to carry for my family had drained from my expression, like water from a cracked bowl. I took my purse, my keys, and the old folder I kept for important papers, though none of those papers had been important enough until last night. Then I stepped outside, locked the door behind me, and drove to the bank. It was a small building, unimpressive to people who measure life in money, not meaning, but I'd always liked it. The windows were clean. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish. And the tellers had known me for years, long before $11 million ever passed through my hands. Inside, the lights were bright, almost too bright. My eyes needed a moment to adjust. A young man greeted me at the desk. "Good morning, Mrs. Caldwell. Do you have an appointment?" "I need to speak with my financial manager," I said. My voice surprised me with how calm it sounded. "Privately." He checked the computer, nodded, and led me toward a glass-walled office. Inside sat a woman in her mid-40s. Sharp suit, warm eyes, and that professional politeness people save for elderly clients who don't cause trouble. "Mrs. Caldwell?" she said, standing. Of course, please sit. Are you feeling all right? You look a little pale. I'm fine, I said, lowering myself into the chair. I need to review all my accounts. All of them? She blinked. Yes, every automatic payment, every transfer, every authorization granted to my family. Her expression shifted, surprise, then something like hesitation. That's quite a lot. It might take a while. I have time. And for the first time in a very long time, I meant it. She pulled up my records. For a few minutes, the only sound in the room was the tapping of her keyboard and the soft hum of the air conditioner. Then she frowned. Mrs. Caldwell, are you aware of these payments? She swiveled the screen toward me. Lines of transactions filled the page. Monthly transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Subscriptions I never purchased. Insurance premiums far higher than mine should be. Loan repayments that had nothing to do with me. Grant's fingerprints everywhere. Quiet, confident theft. The kind no one notices until the well runs dry. Yes, I said. I need every single one of them canceled. Today. She hesitated. Some of these were set up using a power of attorney you signed 3 years ago. That gives your son-in-law. I know what it gives him. My voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. I want it revoked. She studied me, probably deciding whether I understood the gravity of what I was asking. But something in my face must have answered for me. She nodded. All right. We can begin the paperwork. I'll need to confirm your identity for security reasons. Of course. While she gathered the documents, I sat still, hands folded, letting the weight of the moment settle. It felt like tightening a loose thread. One pull, and the whole fabric of their comfort would unravel. She returned with a thick stack of papers. This revocation will freeze all accounts under his control, she said. There may be consequences. He may contact you. He may protest. I expect he will. She gave a small, sympathetic smile. Most people your age don't take steps like this. I'm not most people my age, I said quietly. As I signed each document, a strange calm washed over me. Not relief. Relief comes when danger has passed. This was something deeper, a reclaiming. A returning of my own name to my own hands. When we were finished, she gathered the forms carefully. There's one more thing, she said. Your account history shows significant withdrawals over the past year. Some large, some small. All authorized through that power of attorney. Do you want to audit those too? I nodded. Yes, every dollar. She folded her hands. I'm sorry. For what? For what your family has been doing to you. I held her gaze. So am I. She printed a detailed ledger, page after page, numbers that told a story more brutal than any words. Vacations I never took, medical bills that weren't mine, luxury purchases under my name, loans, debts, lies. I slid the pages into my folder. This time, I didn't shake. As I left the bank, the morning sun had risen high enough to warm the pavement. People passed me without a glance, going about their ordinary days. They had no idea that a woman who was supposed to be dead had just taken back her life, piece by piece. The lake hadn't finished me. The paperwork was where I would begin finishing what they started. I came home from the bank with a folder so thick it barely closed. Every sheet inside it felt like a confession someone else had written in my name. For a moment, standing in the hallway, I simply held it against my chest. Heavy things have their own kind of warmth. They press you down, but they also keep you steady if you lean into them long enough. I set the folder on the kitchen table and brewed more tea. My body needed something warm after the hours of tension, even if my hands were steadier than they had any right to be. While the tea steeped, I looked through the window at the quiet yard. The maple tree still stood like it had for decades, its branches thinning but never giving up. I understood it better now than ever. By noon, the house was still silent, untouched. No phone calls, no knocks at the door, no frantic voices demanding explanations. Of course not. They still thought I was at the bottom of the lake. They were probably somewhere planning how to grieve, practicing their lines, deciding who would deliver the sad news to the neighbors. I almost pitied them. Almost. In the early afternoon, I heard the crunch of gravel outside. Not hurried footsteps, just that casual stroll people take when they think the world is safely under their thumb. Through the window, I saw Milo walking up the path, my nephew, my late husband's sister's boy, once sweet, once soft-spoken, now always broke, always nervous, always pulling at his sleeves like a man waiting for something to collapse. He didn't knock right away. He stood on the porch a long moment, checking the driveway, the windows, the street, like someone coming to collect something he wasn't proud to take. Finally, he knocked. 3 light taps. The same way he used to knock when he was a boy, afraid of waking his uncle from a nap. I opened the door. His face froze. If fear had a sound, it would have been that sharp inhale he made. His eyes grew so wide, I almost thought he might faint on my porch. "Aunt Em? I thought you—" He stopped. His throat moved as he swallowed. "Where have you been?" "In my house," I said. "Where else would I be?" He stared at me as if I'd risen from the grave, dripping weeds and lake water. I kept my expression calm, neutral. Let him fill in his own ghosts. "You weren't at home last night?" he stammered. "We came by." "We knocked." I raised an eyebrow. "You and who?" That rattled him. His hands twitched at his sides. I just... He looked at the ground. "I needed to ask something. It's about the loan." Of course it was. There were always loans, always emergencies, always last opportunities that never turned into anything but more need. "I can't help you anymore, Milo," I said quietly. "You always said." I know what I said. My voice stayed soft, but I didn't let it waver. "Things have changed." He shifted from foot to foot, like a man trying to escape his own skin. "It's not for me. Not really. It's for the business. I told you. If I don't put in my share, they'll cut me out. I'll lose everything." "You don't have anything," I said gently. "Not that they can take." His jaw tightened. He looked older in that moment. Not like the boy who used to bring me crayon drawings of boats and horses, but like a man who had spent too long digging holes he couldn't climb out of. "Please," he whispered. "I just need enough to show them I'm still part of the deal." I thought of the water, the shove. His voice on the dock, thin, shaking, but eager. She sank fast. "Yes," I remembered. "No," I said. He lifted his head sharply. "What?" "No, Milo. I won't give you anything." His face flushed, deep, angry red. For a second, I thought he might shout. But something stopped him. Maybe the look in my eyes, maybe the coldness he wasn't used to seeing. "You don't understand," he murmured, voice low. "I don't have time. Grant said—" "I let that sit in the air," Grant said. Of course he did. I didn't ask what Grant promised him, or what role Milo played on that pier. I didn't want to hear their scripts rehearsed in front of me. Instead, I stepped back, opened the door wider, not as an invitation, but as a dismissal. "I hope you figure out your mess," I said. But it's your mess, not mine. He stood frozen for a moment, breathing hard. Then he backed away, one step, then another, until he reached the porch steps. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. "I've made plenty," I replied. "This isn't one of them." He left without another word. The gravel crunched again. Then silence returned. I closed the door, leaned my hand against it, and let out a slow breath. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. The lake had washed away too much for that. Back in the kitchen, I sat again at the table, pulling the folder closer. I flipped through the pages, line after line of numbers that formed a history of quiet exploitation. But now they were just facts. Evidence. Nothing more. I was no longer their open wallet, and soon they would feel the absence of that silence they relied on. As I looked out the window, I saw the street empty again, peaceful as ever. Let them come in waves. I had already survived worse. The cold water had taught me something my family never bothered to learn. There are things in this world you can push and things you can't. And I was done being pushed. The next morning, I woke before dawn. Not from nightmares, those had already burned themselves out, but from a thought that wouldn't leave me alone. The camera. The one they were so sure wouldn't catch anything. The one they never bothered to look at. Evidence doesn't shout. It just waits. I got dressed slowly, feeling every year in my knees, and wrapped a scarf around my neck. The mornings had turned sharp lately, that kind of cold that slips under your clothes and settles in your bones. Still, I stepped outside, locked the door, and made my way to the car. The drive to the marina was quiet. No music, no radio. Just the sound of tires on pavement and my own breath. I parked in the gravel lot, the same one where we used to come for summer picnics when my daughter was small. Strange how a place can hold both joy and betrayal without changing its face. The marina office was a squat building with peeling paint and a window permanently fogged from moisture. Inside, a young man sat behind the counter, boots up, half asleep over a mug of coffee. He straightened when I came in. "Morning, ma'am. Can I help you?" "Yes, I need footage from last night. From Dock 3. He blinked. "Are you a boat owner?" "No. Security won't release footage unless you're involved in an incident." I was. That made him sit up. What kind of incident?" I looked at him steadily. "The kind you don't talk about in hallways." He hesitated, then stood. "1 minute. I'll get the manager." The manager came out, a woman in her 50s with weathered skin and the calm demeanor of someone who's seen everything that can go wrong near water. Her eyes narrowed slightly when she saw me. "You said you need footage?" she asked. "Yes." "Mind telling me why?" "Because someone tried to kill me last night." The young man behind her sucked in a breath. The manager didn't flinch. She studied my face the way a nurse checks a wound. Quietly, efficiently, without pity. "Come with me," she said. She led me into a back room with monitors lined across the wall. Screens showing rippling water, empty piers, a few fishing boats rocking gently. Dock 3 came up with a swipe of her hand. "You sure you want to see this?" she asked. "I'm sure." The footage played. There I was, small, frail, sitting in that wheelchair like a broken toy. And behind me, the 3 of them, Grant's firm hand on the handle. Milo glancing around nervously. Wendy standing just far enough away to pretend she wasn't part of it. I watched them speak. I couldn't hear the words, but I remembered them. Then the shove. My body hitting the water. my daughter turning her face away. The manager let out a low whistle under her breath. Damn. I didn't respond. My hands lay still in my lap. I had already lived that moment. Seeing it again didn't hurt. It simply confirmed what the lake had already told me. They made their choice. Now, I would make mine. I'll need a copy, I said. The manager nodded. I'll download it. You want a flash drive or a disk? Flash drive. She prepared it in silence. When she handed it to me, her fingers rested on mine for a second longer than necessary. You going to the police? She asked quietly. In time. You want me to file the report? No, not yet. She studied me again, then nodded with a kind of respect I hadn't felt from anyone in a long time. If you need anything at all, you come to me. Understand? I do. I slipped the flash drive into my coat pocket. It felt small there, almost weightless. Strange, how something so tiny could hold the truth of a whole lifetime. As I left the office, the wind off the water cut through my coat, but I didn't shiver. My steps felt slow, but firm. I walked back to the car, passing the dock where it had happened. The boards still glistened faintly from last night's moisture. They had stood right here, thinking I'd vanish quietly beneath the surface, thinking no one would ever know what they'd done. But I knew, and now the camera knew too. I opened the car door, sat down carefully, and took one long breath before starting the engine. Every once in a while, life hands you a moment that splits your world into before and after. This was mine, and I was finally ready for what came after. I didn't drive straight home from the marina. I sat behind the wheel for a long while, the engine off, watching the sun crawl a little higher over the water. My fingers kept brushing the pocket where the flash drive lay. It felt like holding a loaded truth. Small, silent, final. Eventually, I turned the key and headed toward town. Not to the police. Not yet. Justice rushed is justice ruined. My husband used to say that. He was a patient man, slow to anger, but when he acted clean. I'd forgotten that part of him over the years, buried it under compromise and tired hope. Now it rose up like a hand on my shoulder. So I drove to the only person I trusted with something this large. Daniel Reeves's office sat above a hardware store, the same place it had been since the 90s. The paint on the stair rail had peeled off in strips, but the steps held steady under my feet. When I reached the landing, I paused to catch my breath. Age doesn't let you move fast, but it does teach you to move deliberately. The door was partly open. I pushed it gently. Daniel looked up from a pile of papers, his glasses sliding down his nose. For a moment he squinted, as if he thought his eyes were tricking him. Then he stood so quickly his chair rolled back. Imora? Good Lord, woman, you look... He stopped himself. Are you hurt? No, I said. Just older than yesterday. He stared at me a second longer, reading something in my face the way only people who've seen you carry grief can. Then he gestured toward the chair across from him. Sit. Tell me everything. I didn't speak right away. I reached into my coat pocket and set the flash drive on his desk. He didn't touch it, not at first. Lawyers know that anything small and quiet can explode a life wide open. What is that? He asked softly. Evidence, I said, of an attempted murder. He inhaled sharply, but he didn't interrupt. I told him what happened at the lake. Slowly, carefully, the way you tell a doctor where it hurts without raising your voice. His expression changed as I spoke. Disbelief, anger, the hollow look of a man imagining something he wishes he hadn't pictured. When I finished, he leaned back, and ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Jesus, Amora," he whispered. "Your own family." "Yes. You should have called the police immediately." "I know, but you didn't." "No." He sighed, long and heavy. Then he folded his hands on the desk. "All right. So tell me what you want." That was the first moment all day when my throat tightened. What did I want? For years, all I'd wanted was peace, a seat at the table, a phone call without a price tag, a family that saw me as more than a bank account on legs. But that chapter had ended by the lake. "I want control back," I said, "of my money, my house, my name." He nodded. "Reasonable. I want protections in place, legal ones, irrevocable, ones they can't touch. Also reasonable. And I want time before I hand that drive over. I want to understand the terrain before I force their hands." He studied me a moment, then gave a slow, approving nod. "Then we'll do this methodically." He unlocked a drawer and pulled out a stack of forms. Not dramatic, just paperwork. But paperwork can move mountains when used right. "We'll start with a new financial power of attorney," he said, marking fields with a blue pen. "Not for your daughter, not for your son-in-law, not for that nephew. Someone neutral. Someone you trust." I thought of my granddaughter, Lillian, 25, steady as bedrock, with a gentle voice and a spine stronger than people noticed. "Yes," I said. "She'll do." "Good." He wrote her name carefully. "And we'll prepare a limited trust. You'll remain in full control, but the assets will be shielded. If your family tries anything, they'll run straight into a wall." He paused, his eyes flicking to the flash drive. "And that," he said, "goes in my safe until you're ready." I nodded. He opened another drawer and brought out a small, heavy safe box. When he placed the flash drive inside, something in me loosened. Not relief exactly. Relief is too soft. This was more like setting down a weight you'd carried alone in the dark. He closed the safe with a click. "That," he said quietly, "is the sound of your future, no longer depending on people who tried to drown you." I let out a slow breath. We worked for nearly 2 hours. Form after form. Signature after signature. My hand cramped by the end, but I didn't complain. Signing my name had never felt so much like reclaiming my life. When everything was done, Daniel stood and helped me up. "Amora," he said gently, "you know what comes next, don't you?" "Yes." "You know they'll lash out. I expect nothing less. And you know," he added, softer now, "that this is going to hurt." I looked him in the eyes. "It already did." "Last night." He nodded, understanding more in my voice than I said aloud. I left the office, stepping back into the hallway, the wooden boards soft under my shoes. Outside, the wind had picked up. A cold, honest wind. The kind that clears things. I tightened my coat and walked toward the stairs, one step at a time, steady and slow, like someone who had finally stopped running from her own life. I didn't look back. I didn't need to anymore. I didn't go straight home after leaving Daniel's office. My body was tired, but my mind wasn't done wandering. Some days, memories come whether you want them or not. They arrive quietly, like old neighbors who knock without waiting for an answer. I drove to the old pier outside town, the public one, not the marina. The boards were worn down and gray, edges soft from decades of water and wind. My husband used to bring me here when we were young, long before money became a heavy word in our lives. Back then, he'd pack 2 sandwiches and a thermos of sweet tea, and we'd sit on the edge with our legs dangling over the water. He'd talk about everything: fishing, his job at the plant, the strange dreams he had about building a boat he'd never find time to finish. I used to listen to him with my head on his shoulder, letting his steady voice smooth out the rough corners of my day. It was here he told me he wanted children. It was here we argued about whether we could afford a house. And it was here he held my hands the night he got the phone call from work, the one that sent everything spinning, the one that planted the seed of that $11 million settlement years later. He wasn't built for lawsuits. He was built for fixing things with his hands, not fighting corporations with steel teeth. But he did it anyway because we had to, because the injury that wrecked his back also wrecked the future we planned. Sometimes I think the money ruined more than the injury ever did. I sat on the same wooden beam where we once shared sandwiches. The wood groaned quietly under my weight. I could almost see him across from me. Sunburned nose, calloused hands, eyes that softened when they looked at me and hardened when they looked at anyone who tried to push me aside. He would have hated what my family became. He would have hated seeing me tiptoe around their wants, shrinking myself so the house stayed peaceful. He used to tell me, "Em, quiet doesn't mean small. Don't let them confuse the two." But when you love people, especially your own blood, you forgive too much. You bend until bending becomes your posture. I stayed there a long time, listening to the water slap against the pillars. I let myself remember things I'd pushed away. The long months after his death, the sudden interest my family took in my finances, the way Grant spoke about protecting my assets while slowly moving them like chess pieces only he could see. The way Wendy started smiling that tired, apologetic smile every time he made decisions in my name. How Milo drifted in and out of my life like a tide, always carrying some story about a failed business partner or a missed opportunity. I ignored so many signs, because I wanted to believe that love, even in its worn-out form, was still there. The wind picked up, tugging at my hair. My eyes watered, not from emotion, but from the cold. I pressed my palms to the wood, feeling the grain beneath my fingertips, the same texture my husband once pressed his hand against when he leaned over to kiss me. "I should have left you something cleaner than this," I murmured to him. "Not this mess." The pier creaked back, as if answering in its tired bones. I stood slowly, careful with my balance. My legs didn't like long sits anymore. I brushed off my coat and walked back to the car, taking one last look at the empty pier. I didn't come here for comfort. I came because I needed to remember who I was before the years softened me into someone too easy to use. I left the pier feeling heavier. Yes, grief has weight, but also steadier. Grief can be a spine if you let it. When I reached the car door, I paused, breathing in the cold air until my lungs hurt just a little. Then I got in, started the engine, and drove away. I had a home to return to, and a fight that no longer scared me. When I got home from the pier, the house felt different. Not safer, just clearer, as if the walls themselves had finally accepted what I already knew. The old way of living was gone. I set my keys on the counter, hung up my coat, and sat for a moment at the kitchen table, letting the quiet settle. The folder from the bank lay where I'd left it. Numbers, dates, transactions. They were no longer background noise. They were evidence of a life slowly drained, one familiar signature at a time. I reached for the phone to call my granddaughter, then stopped. Lillian deserved better than a rushed explanation over a scratchy line. She deserved the truth face to face, not squeezed between her work schedule and my fear. So I brewed tea instead and let the afternoon slide gently toward evening. Just after 6, my doorbell rang. I knew that knock. 3 even taps, the way only someone gentle would knock. Enough sound to announce herself, not enough to intrude. I opened the door and saw Lillian standing there with her tote bag hanging off one shoulder, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Grandma," she breathed, relief softening her whole face. "You scared me today." Her words startled me. "Scared you how?" "I stopped by earlier," she said, stepping in, "and you weren't home. You always are at that hour. I thought something happened." Something had, but not the something she imagined. "You're here now," I said. "That's enough." She hugged me carefully, mindful of my shoulders. She'd always been like that, gentle where others pushed, patient where others demanded. When she pulled back, she studied my face the way a nurse examines a wound. "You look tired," she said. "I am tired." She nodded, understanding that tired didn't just mean lack of sleep. "I brought you soup," she added, lifting the bag. "And bread from that bakery you like. They had it fresh." The simple kindness of it nearly broke me. How little it took to feel seen. We sat in the living room while she unpacked the food. The house warmed around us. The ticking clock softened. For the first time since the lake, I felt the warmth of another human being without bracing myself. She reached for my hand. "Grandma, is everything all right? You look different." I could have lied. I had lied to keep peace for years, but something about her steady gaze made lying feel like a betrayal of the one person who still deserved truth. "I've been making changes," I said. "Long overdue ones." She squeezed my hand lightly. "Do you need help?" "Yes," I said, "but not the kind you're thinking of." She waited, giving me room. "I made you my financial agent," I said gently. "Through Daniel Reeves, you'll help me oversee things." Her eyes widened, not with greed, but with worry. "Are you sure? That's a lot." "You're the only one I trust," I said simply. She blinked fast, the way she did when she was trying not to show emotion. "Grandma, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything yet." We ate quietly for a few minutes, and the silence felt easy, like when she was a child sitting at my kitchen table coloring, humming under her breath. I watched her push her hair behind her ear, the same way her mother used to do. But Lillian had something Wendy never had. Not because Wendy lacked it, but because life had beaten it out of her. Lillian had steadiness. After dinner, she helped me wash the dishes. The ordinary rhythm of chores steadied my pulse. When we finished, she leaned against the counter. "Is this about Mom?" she asked quietly. "Partly," I said. "But mostly it's about me." She nodded slowly, as if she'd expected that answer. "I won't ask you to choose sides," I said. "You don't have to." She straightened. "I already chose, Grandma. A long time ago." The truth of that settled between us. I felt something loosen in my chest, something I hadn't realized was tight. Before she left, she placed her hands on my shoulders. "Whatever you're dealing with, you won't deal with it alone." I managed a small smile. "I've been alone for a long time, Lily. The difference now is that I'm not helpless." "I know," she said, "but I'm here anyway." When the door closed behind her, the house didn't feel empty. It felt prepared, as if something solid had shifted into place, something that had been waiting years to move. I turned off the lights, walked to my bedroom. and felt the steady pulse of a new truth settling into me. I wasn't fighting for money. I was fighting for the version of myself I used to be before I let everyone treat me like I didn't matter. And now I wasn't fighting alone, fighting. The next morning began with the kind of cold that settles in your joints before you're even fully awake. I sat up slowly, rubbed my knees, and let the room come into focus. The house looked the same as always, but I didn't feel the same. Something in me had shifted, steadied, like a table finally set on all four legs. I brewed tea and sat at the kitchen table with the folder from the bank spread out before me. I read each page more carefully than I had the first time. Names of companies I didn't recognize, insurance policies opened without my knowledge, and debts I supposedly owed. All of it signed with the same calm, practiced hand. Grant's. He had always been neat when he forged things. A tidy thief. At 9, Daniel called. His voice was calm, but I heard something under it. Anger pressed beneath professionalism. "Imora," he said, "I went through the preliminary audit. You should sit down." "I am sitting," I answered. "Good. Then listen carefully." He paused. "Your son-in-law took out 2 lines of credit under your name. One 5 years ago, one last year. Total nearly $300,000. I swallowed. Not shock, just confirmation. "That money is gone," he continued. "No investments, no assets, no trail that ends anywhere legal." I let out a slow breath. "And Milo?" "That's worse." Papers rustled on his end. "He used your information to guarantee a loan for a fraudulent investment group. They're under federal investigation. His name is nowhere on the documents. Yours is." I closed my eyes. That familiar dull ache pressed behind them. The kind that isn't pain, just weariness that has lived too long under your ribs. "Federal?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "If investigators reach your name, I will intervene. But the sooner we get ahead of this, the better." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "What do you need from me?" "For now, nothing. I'm building the case." "But Imora?" His voice softened. "Grant and Milo weren't just taking advantage of you. They were building safety nets for themselves using your identity. If they go down, they'll try to pull you down with them." That didn't frighten me. Not anymore. "They won't," I said quietly. After we hung up, I sat still for a long time, hands folded on the table. The refrigerator hummed. A bird thumped against the window, then fluttered away. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary morning. But nothing about my life was ordinary now. Around noon, the phone rang again. I recognized the number, my daughter Wendy. My hand hovered over the receiver. She had been silent since the lake. That silence was its own confession. I picked up. "Mom?" Her voice was thin, stretched tight. "Mom, I've been worried. Are you all right? I tried calling yesterday." "No," I said. "You didn't." A pause, then a shaky breath. I meant to. Meaning and doing," I said, "are not the same thing." Another breath, this one sharper. "Grant wants to come by and talk. We think there's been confusion about some of the accounts." There was no confusion, only exposure. "I'm not receiving visitors today," I said. "Mom, not today, Wendy." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Is this about the lake?" The words sat between us like something rotten. Finally, I answered, "Yes." She let out a small sound. Not quite a gasp, not quite a sob. "Mom, I didn't know what he was going to do. I thought it was just a scare. I thought he only wanted you to sign." "You were there," I said. "You watched." Silence. A long one. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I felt no anger then, only a tired kind of recognition. Sorry, I said, is the beginning of a sentence, not the end. She didn't reply. I heard shuffling. Then the line went dead. I set the phone down gently, as if it were fragile. Maybe it was. Words can crack things more easily than actions sometimes. Later that afternoon, I drove to Daniel's office again. He greeted me with a stack of documents, real, heavy protections, new trust, new controls, new safeguards against the people who shared my blood but not my conscience. When I signed the final page, Daniel said, "You've effectively cut them off, Imora." "No," I said, sliding the pen aside. "They cut themselves off. I'm only making it official." He gave a small nod of understanding. On the drive home, the sky was turning the color of old silver. The world looked cold, but clean. A different kind of quiet settled in me, one that felt earned. At home, I placed the signed documents in a drawer. Not hidden, just put away. Let Grant panic. Let Milo scramble. Let Wendy struggle with the truth she helped create. Their choices had built this. Mine would finish it. And for the first time in years, I felt the ground under me hold firm. I didn't have to wait long for the storm. The next afternoon, just after 3, I heard a car engine roar up my driveway. Too fast, too loud, the sound of a man who feels his world slipping and thinks noise might hold it together. I didn't look through the blinds. I didn't need to. I knew that sound the way some people know thunder before it breaks. Grant. I set my cup of tea on the table, wiped my hands on my skirt, and walked to the door at my own pace. No hurry, no fear. I opened it before he had the chance to knock. He stood there, cheeks flushed, breath sharp, tie crooked like he'd yanked it loose in anger. For years, he had worn confidence the way other men wore aftershave, thick, obvious, choking. Today it clung to him in patches, slipping off at the edges. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded. I blinked at him slowly. "In my home. You didn't answer your phone." I didn't want to. His jaw tensed. He stepped inside without waiting for me to invite him, like he had the right. Maybe once I let him feel that way, out of habit or fatigue. Not today. I closed the door behind him and moved past him into the living room. He followed, pacing with that restless energy of someone who knows bad news is coming and wants to outrun it. "Your accounts," he said, "are frozen. Completely frozen. Do you know that?" "Yes. I couldn't pay the property insurance yesterday. I couldn't move funds for the repairs. I couldn't—" "That's correct," I said calmly. "You can't do any of that anymore." He stared at me, confusion and anger mixing in his eyes. "Why would you do this? What got into you all of a sudden?" "All of a sudden?" I repeated quietly. "Grant, nothing about this is sudden. It's only sudden to you because I finally stopped cooperating." His nostrils flared. "Your daughter is terrified. She thinks you're losing it. She said you're acting strange, paranoid." "She told me that on the phone," I interrupted. "She also told me she was sorry. 2 sentences from the same mouth. Interesting, isn't it?" Grant paused mid-step. "What does that mean?" I didn't answer. I just let silence fill the room the way water fills a sinking boat. Slowly, inevitably. He shifted, uneasy. "I don't know what you think you're doing," he said finally. "But you can't just cut us out. We've been handling your affairs for years. You need support. You need us." I looked him dead in the eye. "You tried to kill me." He froze. The room didn't. The clock kept ticking. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a dog barked. Life went on, indifferent to the moment a lie breaks open. Grant's voice came out thin. What? At the lake, I said. On the dock, the shove, the water, the three of you walking away. A small twitch ran across his cheek. You're confused. No, I said. I'm remembering clearly. His bravado cracked then, small, quick, like a plate splitting under invisible pressure. You don't have proof, he snapped. I almost smiled. Not out of triumph, just at the predictability of it. I do. He blinked. What proof? The camera at the marina. For a moment, he didn't breathe. Then he laughed. A short, desperate sound. There's no camera facing the dock. There is now. The laugh died. He stepped toward me, then thought better of it. What do you want? He demanded. Nothing from you, I said. Not anymore. You can't just... I can, I said. And I have. Grant's composure crumbled in slow, ugly pieces. If you take this to the police, we're all finished. Milo, Wendy, everyone. You should have thought of that before last night. He ran a hand over his mouth, eyes darting toward the window as if expecting police cars to materialize. We can fix this, he said, struggling for calm. We can sit down, talk like a family. We stopped being a family when you pushed me into that water. He sagged then, shoulders dropping, breath uneven. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked small, like a man who'd reached for something too big and found it was made of teeth. You won't get away with this, he whispered. I already have. He glared at me, jaw clenched, then turned and stormed toward the door. He left it open behind him, as if even closing it felt beneath him now. I walked over, shut it myself, and slid the deadbolt into place. The metal clicked, simple and final. I stood there with my hand on the lock, breathing slowly. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. The fear, whatever scraps of it had remained, was gone. Grant had shown me the cost of trusting the wrong people. Now I was showing him the cost of underestimating the right woman. Grant didn't return that evening, though for an hour after he sped off, I half expected his car to circle back, headlights sweeping across my windows like an accusation. But the street stayed quiet. Too quiet, almost. The way a house feels right after a storm passes, still, but not peaceful. I made tea, but it tasted bitter. My hands were steady, but my shoulders ached from holding myself upright through the whole confrontation. So I sat in my armchair, wrapped in the old crocheted throw my husband's mother made decades ago, and waited for my breath to settle. Waiting had become a familiar pattern these past few days. Waiting for truth to ripen. Waiting for people to show their faces. Waiting for the next storm. It came the next morning. A police cruiser pulled up to my house just after 10, not with sirens or urgency, quietly, discreetly, as if the officers knew instinctively this was a situation where noise would only embarrass everyone involved. Two of them stepped out, a young woman with a clipboard and an older man with kind eyes, but the stance of someone who's seen more broken families than he can count. I opened the door before they knocked. Mrs. Caldwell? The older officer asked gently. Yes. I'm Sergeant Wilcox. This is Officer Turner. We received a report from your son-in-law that you may be in distress, possibly confused or acting erratically. Of course he did. I stepped aside to let them in. I'm neither confused nor distressed. Please, come in. They followed me into the living room. Officer Turner glanced around the house. Orderly, calm, clean. No signs of chaos. No medication bottles scattered around. No dishes stacked. just a lived-in home belonging to a woman who still ran her own life. "Mrs. Caldwell," Sergeant Wilcox said gently, "your son-in-law stated that you might be making false claims regarding an incident at the lake." "He did," I said. The officer studied my face. "May I ask what happened?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked to the small drawer of my desk, opened it, and took out the flash drive. The room felt heavier for a moment, as if it understood the weight of what I carried. I handed it to the sergeant. "This is what happened." He held the drive carefully, like it might crack if handled wrong. "Is this video evidence?" "It is." "Have you viewed it yourself?" I nodded. "Yes." "May I ask what it shows?" "My family," I said quietly, "trying to push me out of their lives in the most permanent way possible." The young officer lowered her clipboard. A tiny shift. Human, not procedural. Sergeant Wilcox exhaled slowly. "Mrs. Caldwell, your son-in-law claimed you imagined the event." "I didn't imagine the water filling my lungs," I said. "I didn't imagine crawling out of the lake alone. I didn't imagine their voices." He nodded once. "We'll need to review this." "Of course." The young officer hesitated. "Do you feel safe here, ma'am?" "Yes," I answered. "Now I do." She wrote something quietly on her clipboard. Before they left, the sergeant paused at the doorway. "Mrs. Caldwell, whatever happens next, you've done the right thing." "I didn't do it for righteousness," I said softly. "I did it because they left me no choice." He nodded. Then they walked to their cruiser. When the door closed and their car pulled away, the house sank back into silence. A different silence this time. Not hollow, not fearful. A waiting silence. I made another cup of tea. This time it didn't taste bitter. Around noon, the phone rang. I expected Wendy. I expected panic, tears, explanations. But it wasn't her. It was Daniel. "They picked up the footage," he said. "The officers called me just now. They'll open a formal investigation by the end of the day." "I see. And Amora? Once this starts, they'll scramble. They'll lie. They'll send you every apology, every excuse." "I know." He paused. "Are you ready for that?" I was ready the moment they walked away from that dock. Silence on the line. Not uncomfortable, just full. "Then," he said, "I'll stay ahead of it." After the call, I sat again in my armchair, hands resting on my knees. The sunlight fell across the rug in a thin strip, dull gold. What surprised me most wasn't fear. There was none. What surprised me was the absence of grief. Maybe grief had burned out on that dock when I saw the truth in the angle of their shoulders as they walked away. Whatever came next, arrests, hearings, lawyers, broken ties, would simply be the consequences they had earned. I didn't need revenge. Truth was enough. And now it had footsteps. It had a badge. It had a file number. It was on its way. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Maybe because small towns have long memories. Maybe because the officers saw my face and understood more than I said. Or maybe because the footage spoke louder than any trembling words could have. 2 days after the police visit, a cruiser parked again outside my house. This time, not quietly. I watched from the window as Grant stood on my lawn, hands cuffed, his arrogance wiped clean from his face. He didn't look toward my house. Not once. Shame does that. Forces a man to stare at the ground he once walked like he owned it. Milo was picked up an hour later. I didn't see it myself, but Daniel called to tell me. He ran, Daniel said, but not far. Running had always been his instinct. It was the standing still that he never mastered. Wendy wasn't arrested. She hadn't touched me, hadn't pushed. Her crime was silence, and silence is a wound that doesn't fit in legal boxes. But she came to my house that afternoon, small and pale, as if the world had suddenly grown too large for her. She knocked softly. I opened the door. Her eyes were red, mascara smudged, hair unbrushed. She looked like the child she used to be, lost, unsure, painfully tender. "Mom," she whispered. "They took Grant." "I know." She pressed a hand to her mouth. "They showed me the video." I stepped aside so she could come in. She moved slowly, like someone walking barefoot over broken glass. In the living room, she didn't sit right away. She hovered near the armchair before finally lowering herself into it, shoulders folding inward. "I didn't think—" Her voice cracked. "I didn't think he'd do it. Not really. He said it was just pressure. That we needed to talk to you. That maybe scaring you, just a little, would make things easier. I didn't know he'd push you. I didn't know he'd—" "You knew enough," I said. Not sharp, just true. She swallowed hard. "I was afraid of him. I know. And I was afraid of losing everything." I sat down across from her. "Fear doesn't excuse what happened." "I know that, too." She wiped her eyes with a trembling hand. "I didn't come to defend myself. I know what I did, or didn't do. I just came to see if you hated me." I let the question hang in the air. Hate is a heavy word. Too heavy for someone I once held in my arms when she was feverish and small, whispering stories until she slept. "No," I said finally. "I don't hate you." Her shoulders shook. "But," I added, "I can't pretend this didn't happen." She nodded, tears dripping silently onto her hands. "I want to fix things," she whispered. "I don't know how, but I want to." "You start," I said softly, "by standing on your own feet, not on mine." She nodded again, small, frightened, but honest. And honesty, even late, is still honesty. When she left, the house felt heavy for a moment, but not in the same way as before. This weight wasn't betrayal anymore. It was aftermath. Aftermath has edges, but it doesn't drown. That evening, Daniel called again. "Charges are filed," he said. "Your testimony won't be needed until next week." "Good." "And Amora. The trust is secure. Everything is in your granddaughter's name if anything happens to you. Exactly how you asked." I closed my eyes for a moment. Not from exhaustion, but from relief that wasn't soft. It was clean. "Thank you," I said. When the house went quiet again, I sat alone with the last cup of tea for the night. The steam rose slowly. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. Things were breaking apart, some relationships, some illusions, some long-held lies. But I wasn't breaking. I was finally standing. The week after the arrests passed in a strange kind of quiet. Not the hollow silence that used to settle over this house like dust, but something clearer, cleaner. I woke up each morning without holding my breath, and that alone felt like a small miracle. I spent the first few days doing ordinary things: laundry, sorting old letters, trimming the dead branches on my rose bushes. My body still ached, but not the way it had when fear lived inside my joints. This ache was familiar, the ordinary kind that comes with age and weather changes. Daniel called often, more than he had reason to, but I knew why. Some people check on you because the law requires it. Others check because they remember who you used to be when life hadn't yet bruised you. Daniel fell into the second category. By Thursday, He said something that stayed with me. Imora, you don't have to stay in that house forever. You can start over if you want. Start over. At 78. I laughed a little at that, but the idea didn't slip away the way I expected. It lingered. That night, I sat by the window and looked out at the yard. The maple tree was thinning, and the paint on the porch rail was peeling. This house had held me through grief, through loneliness, through quiet betrayals that arrived disguised as concern. But maybe it had done its share. Maybe I had too. The next morning, I packed a small bag and drove toward the coast. The cottage I found wasn't new or fancy. It was a small place, white paint chipped at the corners, sitting a few streets from the shoreline. The owner, a widower my age, seemed surprised I wanted it. "You're sure?" he asked. "Most folks your age want something closer to town." "I've spent enough years close to things," I said. "I want something a little farther from all that." When I stepped inside, the air smelled like old pine and sea salt. The floors creaked. The light was soft. There was no family history here, no shadows in the corners. Just space. I didn't sign anything that day. I simply sat on the small porch for a while, listening to the distant crash of waves. The sound was comforting, predictable. Water doesn't lie. It tells you everything by the way it moves. I drove home slowly, letting the idea take root. The next days were a flurry of decisions, quiet ones. I told Daniel to prepare the purchase papers. I visited the cottage again. I stood on its porch and watched the gulls trace wide circles over the ocean. I thought of my husband then, not the younger man from photographs, but the version of him I carried in my memory. Tired, gentle, stubborn in all the right ways. He would have liked the cottage. He would have stood beside me on that porch with his arm around my shoulders and said, "This feels right, Em." And it did. It felt right. On the day I signed the papers, Lillian drove me. She didn't ask many questions. She just held my hand when the keys were finally placed in my palm. "You sure?" she whispered. "Yes," I said. "This is mine." Back at home, I began packing slowly. Not hurried, not emotional, just decisive. I boxed up what mattered. A few books, photographs, my husband's watch, the quilt, the teapot that survived every decade of my life. The rest I left behind without ceremony. Let the house hold its memories. I didn't need to carry them all. The night before the movers came, I sat alone in the living room. The walls looked too bare, too honest without their usual clutter. I let my fingers trace the arm of the chair, the same chair I'd sat in the night after the lake. It was strange how quickly a life could shift, how sharply a woman could change once she remembered her own worth. I wasn't running away. I was moving toward something. A place where no footsteps would creep down my hallway with intentions soaked in greed. A place where no hands would push me toward dark water. A place where the silence wasn't heavy with unspoken debts. A place where I belonged to myself again. When I went to bed that night, I slept. Not lightly, not fitfully. I slept the way a woman sleeps when she has finally decided she deserves a life that doesn't hurt. The cottage felt like a different kind of quiet the moment I stepped inside with the last of the boxes. Not the hollow quiet of my old house, where silence settled like dust on unused corners of my life. This quiet had shape, breath, and a pulse I could almost hear if I stood still enough. I placed the box on the wooden floor and straightened slowly, letting my knees adjust. The windows were open, letting the sea wind move through the rooms. Curtains I hadn't hung yet fluttered like hands waving me forward. The air smelled of salt and pine sap. Clean, honest. I carried the box to the small kitchen and unpacked my old teapot first. Some things stay with you because they've earned their place. I set it on the stove, turned on the kettle, and leaned against the counter, breathing in the simple truth of a new beginning. No footsteps overhead, no raised voices, no waiting for a door to slam. Just the steady rhythm of the ocean, rolling in and rolling out. I heard a soft knock on the porch. When I opened the door, Lillian stood there with a bag of fresh groceries. "I thought you might need these," she said. "New kitchens feel empty at first." "Not for long," I replied, stepping aside. She wandered the small living room, smiling at the mismatched furniture, the faded rug, the chipped bookshelf. "Feels like a place where someone can breathe," she said. "It is." She hugged me before she left. A long, quiet hug that didn't ask for anything. When she drove away, I stood on the porch for a while, watching the sky blush into evening. Later, I made tea and took my cup down the narrow path to the beach. The sand was cool under my shoes. The waves curled in slow lines, brushing the shore like they were smoothing out the edges of the world. I sat on a driftwood log and let the wind push my hair back. My body ached, yes, but not the kind of ache that frightened me. This was the ache of a life lived, not stolen. Grant and Milo were awaiting hearings. Wendy had visited twice. Quiet, careful visits where she spoke little and listened much. I didn't promise her reconciliation, but I didn't close the door either. Some wounds need time. Some people do, too. As for me, I had no more battles left to fight. Only days to live, slowly and freely. I didn't crave victory. I craved peace. And peace, for the first time in many years, felt reachable. I sipped my tea and watched the line where the sea met the sky. I thought of all the versions of myself I'd been: wife, mother, caretaker, forgiver, survivor. Now I was simply a woman sitting by the water, claiming nothing but her own quiet dignity. The lake had tried to take me. My family had nearly helped it. But I walked out of that cold water with more than breath. I walked out with a future. The waves curled closer, then slipped away. A steady rhythm, patient and sure. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I wasn't afraid of starting over. And I wasn't afraid of who I had become in the process. If anything, I was grateful. For clarity, for truth, for the strength age gives you when youth has stopped pretending to help. I finished my tea, stood slowly, and brushed the sand from my hands. The horizon glowed faintly, dim but promising. Before I headed back up the path, I said one last thing into the open air, more to myself than to anyone listening. You're allowed to choose yourself, no matter how late. And if you're reading this now, listening to an old woman's quiet truth, remember this. Don't wait for someone to push you into deep water before you reclaim your life. Choose yourself while you're still standing. And if this story touched you, share it. Someone else may need it more than you think.